everyone, and thank you so much for staying and hanging out with us for the talkback. As good as the film was, the talkback is going to be even better, I promise. I love this beautiful, intimate crowd. My name is Afeni Grace. I will be moderating this, I would say evening, but it's officially nighttime. So I'm moderating tonight's panel to talk about the film you just saw, Master. So the film Master, it prioritizes recognition over comfort, right? The film's writer and director, Miriama Diallo, this beautiful young Black woman, uses the horror genre to express the unease that Black women, Black people, often feel in spaces, institutions that are built and thrive on exclusion and silence. The film explores the stories of three women, a student, a professor, a headmaster, who have different intentions and expectations. And their stories in this film highlight how the past can haunt the present, how excellence and ambition can often be isolating for marginalized people, and especially highlights how inclusion without reconciliation can be dangerous. So I would like for us to not solve the film, right? That's not the goal for this evening. The goal for this evening is to sit with and explore that unease, that discomfort, especially the urgent themes that are expressed in the film. I would like for us to be curious about that together. So we'll have, a talk back. Y'all, I know y'all got some feelings, some thoughts you want to express. But I'd like for us to start with our panel conversation. And this panel right here, oh my gosh, an incredible lineup of artists, of scholars, of women. I want to shout out, of course, Independent Picture House and the D'Angelo Dia, not only for bringing us all together and curating this incredible group of panelists, but for choosing a great film for us to discuss for Black History Month and leading into Women's History Month. So we'll kind of converge those two themes if we can, okay? All right, so allow me to introduce our three panelists. I'll start with Dr. Randi Gill-Sadler. Dr. Randi Gill-Sadler is a professor of Africana Studies at Davidson College, specializing in Black feminist history and Black women's literature. Her scholarship and teaching examine literature, film, and culture as critiques of U.S. empire and power. Love that. In the middle, we have the lovely Tyla Barnes. Tyla is a Southern-based director, writer, and producer who uses film to tell culturally grounded, impact-driven stories. Her work includes brand and nonprofit projects for organizations like Beats by Dre and the NAACP, amongst many others, as well as her work in a short film that we'll dive into, particularly Hair Days. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Portia Marie York. Dr. York is the founder and CEO of York Creative Education Group and an adjunct professor of fiber arts at Lenoir Rhyne University. Her work bridges fiber arts, STEAM education, and equity, centering creative well-being and access for underrepresented youth. Can y'all please give these ladies a hand? So I'll start with a question for all three of you ladies. We can start with Dr. York, if that's okay. In one word, what was your immediate emotional reaction to Master?
My immediate emotional reaction was exhaustion, complete exhaustion. There was one scene where Gail came down the stairs from the attic and she was like, like she was so eroded, right? There was so much accumulation of trauma and oppression and there's so much accumulation of these decision-making things that she had to take care of throughout her entire life that it exhausted her. You saw the exhaustion in Jasmine. You saw the exhaustion in Gail. That was my immediate reaction.
My immediate reaction, honestly, on top of that, because I totally agree with everything you just said, but also was just like an immense feeling of feeling seen, only because it's like so many instances that you see in there and that you experience that you cannot put language to, but to see it visually, I think it gave me this feeling of, okay, you're not crazy, you know, like these things are happening to all of us. So while it was exhausting and anxiety driven, you know, to watch, it's like, well, how many times have I also been through this exact same thing and did not get a chance to process it until I'm seeing this?
I think the one word that came to me after I finished this was probably struggle, and not so much the struggle against or the struggle against white people, but rather the intra-racial struggle that also plays out in these environments, which I thought was a particularly powerful angle that also I wanted to delve more into in terms of how that was animating a lot of the plot and characterization.
Oh yeah, this is gonna be fun. I'm gonna be smiling a lot, even though the content isn't like smile worthy, but I can't help myself. I feel so honored to be here with y'all. So I have another question for all three of you ladies, and you can answer it in any order that you'd like. But I'd like to kind of further introduce you to our audience. What through lines did you notice between the film and your own work, particularly around environment, legacy, and belonging?
I could jump in. I was processing that, and in the work that I do, just as kind of an educator and a person who's looking at education and equity, I think about the environment, right? And I think environment and belonging go hand in hand. And so I was thinking about how a space like Ancaster was very old world architecture, old oil paintings of mostly white men, the student body makeup, the faculty makeup, like all of that environment was very stressful. And so I see that in my work as well. And then how belonging connects is, how do you see yourself in that environment if you don't feel like you belong? You know, you can't see yourself there if no one looks like you, if the environment doesn't invite you, you know, if you're not welcomed into the environment. So that's kind of like where I see the through line with what I do in education and the arts, and trying to intersect education and equity, and how the environment needs to be welcoming and inviting.
That's super good. I love that. I think in my work as a creative, and kind of like the through lines that I saw that I also try to emulate is just like, for kind of like, what are we doing this for? And kind of she spoke to it at the end, is like, I did all of this for what? Like, for what is the affirmation that I was chasing to do all of these things and be in a place where, like you said, is not conducive for me or does not represent me. And I think in my work, I'm always looking for, how can I continue to affirm people who look like me and people who've had the experiences that I've had, through the set design, through the music choices, through all of those things. Like, how am I creating that tangibly, so that somebody halfway across the world, if they see my film, can understand even just a little bit of what that is, what that feels like, what that looks like. So I think that was kind of like the through line that I definitely kind of held on to a little bit, was at the end, once, you know, the credits roll and all that other stuff, is like, but what did you do this for?
I'm gonna say something that may be controversial, but when I watch film, as somebody that teaches literature and film, I'm not looking for a film to see myself in. I understand films as their own creative texts that are trying to tell us something about how the filmmaker understands the world, not necessarily should I see myself in this, right? And so as somebody who teaches literature, I think what this film was showing, particularly because most of the two faculty were literary professors, part of what they were showing that I kind of thought with is how we're taught to value certain pieces of cultural production. So what it means to be in a literature class and be reading Nathaniel Hawthorne, and that being highlighted as a canonical text, a text that everyone should know. It's not just teaching you about aesthetics, it's saying what politics should you value, right? And so that is important, not just for in the classroom, but for in the world. What cultural pieces do we value? Where do we give our power to in terms of what we watch, what we read? In my own research, I'm not so much interested in belonging. I actually study more discord and antagonism between Black people, more so along the lines of class and people's proximity to empire. So I think with this film, I think there's a kind of easy way to look at it as all of these Black women are suffering, but they all have different class positions, they all have different aspirations. And so for me, this film was very much thinking about where racial solidarity fails and why.
Can you please expand on that? I have, of course, my list of questions, but I want to highlight that because So of course, when I was requested to moderate the conversation, I watched the film again, right? And then watched YouTube reviews and all these things, right? But when I first saw the film was when it came to Amazon, I think in 2022. I think it was straight to Amazon? I can't remember, but I saw it on Amazon. And I remember being pissed off a lot. 2022, I've grown since then. But I remember that unease and that anger. Particularly what stood out to me was when first of all, if we notice that all of the other Black people in the film were cleaners, servers, even to the very end. With Nina Simone playing, we saw 3 Black people working in servitude, right? In the film, it's called Master. But what really got to me, to your point, Dr. Sadler, was the lunch lady. Because talk about feeling seen, talking about I've had these experiences before. And it's this discord and antagonism between people, but there's different, right, levels of class and education, all these different age, all these different layers. Can you speak more to kind of what the film unearthed as it relates to that?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of interesting kind of class clashes throughout the film. I want to say the university exploits everyone. Yes. Everyone who works there is underpaid, overworked, especially compared to the billion-dollar endowments that a lot of these university has, and we can imagine that Ancaster is one of them. One of the things I think that's interesting about the cafeteria worker is I think what goes unsaid is her assumptions about Jasmine's class, right? She's probably looking at her as you a bougie Black girl at this school who I maybe don't have anything in common with as a service worker, right? And we understand service workers to be some of the most exploited workers across labor. For me, part of that was actually affirmed when Jasmine gets wrongfully assumed that she's a certain type of student from a certain background. But how quickly does she defend herself by saying, I'm from the suburbs, which is her saying something about her class, right? I'm not a poor Black person. I was class president in valedictorian, I'm from Tacoma, and she stopped short of, I'm not a, right? So I think there's a lot there, and again, to me, that's the kind of interesting, compelling things about we all end up in this space, but with different class backgrounds and different class desires, so yeah.
And that's does anyone want to add to that?
I just want to say sometimes that happens because we always feel like we have to defend ourselves in some way, right? She was defending herself to live, who automatically assumed she wasn't smart enough to be there and couldn't handle the text that they were reading. And so she, who do you think I am? Defending herself.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that. I think to me, the more appropriate defense is to call out the anti-blackness of the professor, as opposed to saying, how could you think this about me? I'm from this class. And I think that's the kind of tricky thing that happens, particularly in white spaces. We're encouraged to say or disidentify from Black working class culture. And she did that in that moment instead of saying, you're being anti-Black, actually, right?
And I want to speak to, my dad would always say, if you don't know white supremacy, everything you think you know would only confuse you. And that speaks to the pervasiveness, and it's really explored, I think, really well in this film of like, it's everywhere, it follows, it's the air that you breathe, particularly on a campus like Ancaster. And then the anti-Blackness comes within people who are Black. And so it's this weird like inner battle and turmoil, inner cognitive dissonance. We can go on and on about it. And it's very interesting. And I think the interaction between Jasmine and Liv, and between the lunch lady and Jasmine, is an example of that kind of like a manifestation of that anti-Blackness that shows up within Black people. And I also want to speak to the generational, like the intergenerational experience of being excluded, of wanting to belong, of being in an environment that is not conducive to your health. Because Jasmine, she was so quick to defend, she's from the suburbs, she's well educated, she's not, right? But maybe, once, if she was able to live longer, right, she would have been better equipped to better call it out. When you're young, you're not probably properly able to defend yourself all of the time. Like, you grow older and wiser, right? So Jasmine's story versus Liv's story, right? Versus, I was gonna say Regina Hall, versus Gail's story. Because that's Regina Hall, okay? But it just speaks to their age, their backgrounds, and then we're not even going to, we could get into Liv in particular with that cloak, that Black cloak. Wasn't that deep? It was like a cloak of Blackness that she put on. That was deep. But I'm gonna get into my additional panel questions. Okay, this one's for you, Tyla. Master's cinematography is restrained but deeply unsettling, right? We got long corridors, muted color palettes, shadowed interiors, and stillness that feels watchful, like being watched, right? What visual or cinematic choice or choices spoke the loudest to you, Tyla, and how did it shape your emotional response to the film, and especially as a filmmaker? And how is it a departure from your own cinematic choices?
Yeah, there was, the cinematography in it was so good, so brilliantly done. And I think one of the things that stood out the most to me was the consistent level of distance between person and camera, especially when it came to, our main character, when it came to Jasmine and even Regina, Gail, like when it came to her, like the distance between where the camera sat and how far away and how isolated that she was consistently throughout the film was something very powerful. And even when there were no words, spoke a lot for itself. Also just the use of color, and the thing with like horror and trying to create a feeling or a vibe or a cinematic reference for something that cannot be seen, right? And I think that was kind of one of the other things we were talking about, but let me know if I'm getting too ahead of myself. Okay, but like with like the horror genre, it's like and telling this story, that you have to create those levels and those layers to it for that reason, because you are explaining something that is ambient, and you have to say it through lighting, you have to say it through shadows. You have to, like, I don't know if you guys noticed, but like there was a lot of like top lighting in like the film, which often creates shadows like underneath the eyes of a lot of the white characters, and that's very intentional. Like, you have to be extremely intentional and well thought out with those choices. So between that and then just being able to create the feeling and the eeriness of surveillance, of being in the top corner of a room, of being slightly behind a wall as if you're just peeking through and watching them without permission, only emphasizes everything I think that we've already, kind of said about it. So yeah.
All right, so there's so many places that I could go with this. Dr. York, the film frames the university as a space that is nearly as old as the country itself, which is strongly intentional, right? We can make our own inferences about that. Carrying forward its values of wealth, hierarchy, and exclusion. Based on your work, and you spoke to this a bit, based on your work in equitable learning design, how do institutions often cloak harm in tradition? And what does it take, do you think, to unravel these systems thread by thread?
Yeah, so as we all saw, and I mentioned earlier, I looked at it as this university was being portrayed as very old world, legacy ridden, all of the old architecture, the dark buildings, the makeup of the student body and the makeup of the faculty body. And some things are put into place in universities like that, and many universities, you probably feel this as well, is that there's like this veil over things. This veil that kind of keeps things safe, like we've always done it this way, and this is a neutral policy, and language that's put in place to kind of keep things in place, keep people who are excluded, keep people who are in power. So like these decisions are made because they're protected by a veil. And so, when you start thinking about how can you unravel that, you have to see the patterns. You have to see like what is going on repeatedly, who are in positions that are being elevated and who are in positions that are being left out, and then naming them, like intentionally naming them. Like, this is, an exclusionary practice. This is, oppressive. And naming them, and then piece by piece unraveling that to then rebuild it. So sometimes, sometimes destruction is not bad. Sometimes you unravel that so that then you can rebuild something that's stronger.
That's great. So glad we're recording this. We can come back to it. This is good. Okay, Dr. Sadler, Jasmine's story suggests that inclusion, as I mentioned at the top, inclusion without reconciliation and transformation can be deadly. How does the film master complicate these liberal, often, narratives of diversity and inclusion and representation, right? And firsts, especially within higher education. And I also want to, and when I ask this question, I also think about how your work has explored and critiqued this U.S. empire. And I also want to highlight, because this is something that I've been thinking about, and then when I researched you, I just felt like I don't know, what is the saying? Like a brain itch, my brain had an itch and it got scratched or something like that. Because you referenced the U.S. empire, and for me, I've been thinking about how racism, in the U.S., racism is one of the places that it's been perfected. It has been an obsession to justify egregious things, right? And so it's really informed the U.S., but also it's part of the reason why the U.S. is the superpower that it is, on the backs of people who have been of a particular race, and that continues to happen. And so it's really ironic, right, how that happens, how that plays a role. So I'm gonna ask the question again because I forgot. I think we all forgot. Jasmine's story suggests that inclusion without transformation and reconciliation can be deadly. How does Master complicate liberal narratives of DEI, representation, and firsts, right? Especially within higher education?
Yeah, so I have two thoughts on this. I think the discourses of inclusion or diversity or multiculturalism, what the film shows is that they fail, right? And part of the reason why they fail is because they don't fully explore the structural conditions that produce this, right? We actually never hear the term empire or colonialism in this film, but if this school is as old as a country, it would mean you would have had to dispossess indigenous people to even have it. And this never comes up in the film, right? So it doesn't properly foreground discourses of diversity, multiculturalism, inclusion. They don't properly foreground imperialism. And then they also, and this is where I think the film has limitations, they don't foreground collective struggle. It becomes about the individual. So even as much as I felt for Gail at the end, that monologue at the end was, I could have done something, I should have done more. And so we fail again because it keeps coming back to the individual. We never come to collective struggle that deconstructs that hierarchy where students and faculty and staff can come together across these different positionalities. And so that's where I think those discourses fail. And if I could just say one more thing on this, we have to understand the university as part of US imperialism by telling us what counts as knowledge, who's an expert, right? This whole issue around you have to major in something to make money. All of this is to keep US empire going. And in my own study of radical Black feminist writers, particularly in the 60s and 70s, and so we see in this film, Louisa Weeks commit suicide in 65. In 69 is where you have uprisings across America, universities, students and faculty demanding Black studies, right? And Black studies was not just the study of Black people, it was a full reconceptualization of what knowledge is and producing knowledge towards liberation, right? And so people I study like Toni K. Bombara, for example, is a writer and a professor. She writes in 69 in the essay, if we're to have a relevant education, we must topple the university as it stands now or start our own. So, and I have a copy of that if people want the essay. But so we can see that there are other traditions of engaging the university that are not begging for inclusion, right? Inclusion is actually a compromise. If we go to the 60s and 70s, they were saying we want something altogether different. So yeah.
I have to say, right, somebody want to clap? Keep clap. I think it's so freeing to even have heard you say that as a person who went to school, but as a person who, and we can all speak to the ways that we feel not included for whatever reason, because we didn't do that well in high school to go to a great school, or we couldn't afford to graduate, or we don't fit into these particular modes. So that's just really all that it is. There's a mode there's different modes that none of us, we don't fit into all of them, right? And so to hear you say that this superpower, that the ways for us all to be free is for a level of true dismantling to happen, is very freeing. And let's be very clear, this film, this conversation is not just about Black women or Black people. Who said, unless we are all free, none of us are free? Who said that? Multiple people said that. And that's, we're gonna keep it at that. Multiple people said, I just said it. Okay? And it's the truth, right? So I want to really like ground that in, unless we all are free, none of us are free. And I would even go further to say that the freedom of Black people in this country and people of African descent globally have been treated bad. Let's just say that, right? We'll say that. And their freedom, their uplift and honest and truth and reconciliation is something that will transform us all and improve the quality of life for us all. So it's great that we're having this conversation, and I really appreciate you for sharing. I have a really long question that I sent you, and I'm gonna come back to it if we have the time, because it's probably my favorite question. But Tyla, I wanna get into your film, Hair Days. Beautifully shot film, and in such great contrast to Master, right? But still exploring, has similar elements, I would say. And Dr. York, you spoke to this, you spoke about environment. In your short film, Hair Days, go check it out, it's on YouTube. It's like Hair Days, but like school days, D-A-Z-E, Hair Days, look it up. Environment plays a radically different role than in the film Master. It affirms, which a word you shared, rather than erases. How do you see Master functioning as a cautionary tale? And please, anyone else feel free to chime in too, about what happens when environments are actively hostile to Black self-definition.
So well, first, my film Hair Days, I did in 2021, I believe. I don't know, my years are getting mixed up. But I did in 2021, but it was basically a film about my journey as a Black woman coming into loving my natural hair from childhood to adulthood. So really through that film and through learning so much and kind of doing like my own analysis of what I believed about myself, from when I was a kid to when I was a teenager to now as an adult, and how that transition kind of happened, and how not only environment but also like community played a huge part in that. And I think that with like Master, like I said, they do an amazing job of making you feel very isolated and making you feel very alone through the environmental changes, through the set design, through the long tables that they use. Like they do an amazing job at that. And I think even with my film Hair Days, the goal was to do the opposite, and instead of like in Master, the way that it strips the characters down to where it's just that the focus is on them, the focus is on their thoughts, on their minds, but again, that isolation of not being able to have that communal kind of, element to it. Most of the shots in there that they did, you very rarely ever see Jasmine in a shot with anybody else. Like she's always, most of the time, they have a single on her, whether that's wide or whether that's super tight. Very rarely is she ever shot in any type of aspect where she's with multiple people. One of the great parts about the film was the first time that I was like, oh wow, like this is great, is when she had that hug in the bathroom. Like that was like such a beautiful moment, and one of the only parts of the film that you ever see her environment affirm her in that way with the shot selection and how they did that. So I think that environment plays a huge part. Community also plays a huge part in coming from a background of going to a HBCU and having the experience of, being around and in an environment where I was affirmed, where I saw myself, in every room that I went in. That does something psychologically for you as you grow up. And with my film was a reflection of that, of how did the things that I saw, how were the environments that I was in play into my feeling of not loving my hair when I was younger, or not being able to come into my own or have the confidence to say, hey, like, no, you can wear your curls, and honestly, I didn't wear my hair out until I got to Hampton. Like that was the first time that I like actually wore my natural hair and was like, but it was because the environment was conducive for it. I forgot the question.
It's perfect.
But yeah.
Thank you. Ladies, do you have anything that you'd like to share about environment, about community, and how it shapes the mind?
I was just thinking about what you said about that scene in the bathroom, because I kept thinking throughout the film about the isolation, right? Isolation with Gail, isolation with Jasmine, and even Liv in some ways, some isolation there. And that scene in the bathroom, I felt like there was a small bonding moment, like just a teeny bonding moment where she was like, "You're not wrong, you know, come join us," and kind of giving her a feeling of a community. And then it was abruptly interrupted, like immediately, like, "What is this? Don't go there. They did that to me too." So she started feeling like, "Oh, I shouldn't do this." That's increased isolation, you know, and that leads to all of that erosion of well-being, like all of it, you know.
Okay, so one of the main critiques of the film was that it fell flat as a horror film, like the genre of horror, it fell flat. And in this, I have this question for all of you, lovely panelists. The film suggests that hate, exclusion, and racism can behave like a possession, like this pervasive evil element, right? Like thinking of kind of like that haunting evil presence that the witch hanging and all these, the Louisa Weeks, right? Like that it is set. And it behaves like something inherited and unseen. Did that framing resonate with you? And if so, how? And we can take it anywhere we want to take it. Do we feel like, and as y'all think about it, do we feel like there was an evil presence? Like there was like, the witch was there and she was like possessing people? Like do we feel like Jasmine was like a sacrifice or in some weird way? Like, you know, what do we think, y'all? And go ahead.
I know I'm white, and I hate that I have to say this and get this off my chest. I feel like the horror of this movie is it's not just racism, it's the effect of racism on that student. And it was so beautiful to see that done in film,
Right.
in this raw way. And it's been boiling in my chest since y'all have been talking. So thank you for doing this. Anyway, I'm gonna be quiet now.
No, absolutely. Right. But that is kind of, it's like, wait, because you feel that horror. That's an American Horror Story. Like that's real life horror, right? And so yeah, like I agree. Like the effects of it is like haunting. It's like sinister.
It's because it's so grounded in reality. Is what makes that so scary. And yes.
I'm gonna go to Jody. Right back to you. Yes, Jody.
I would say that the horror part is extremely real because, you know, when they say as a Black person you're never alone, somebody's always watching you, no matter what you're doing. And I feel like they did a wonderful job in showing somebody looking at you, someone in your business, someone trying to make you feel bad about trying to have community. Just a little comment, "Oh, we need some flavor. Thank God you're here. Oh, yeah, I'm so happy. You know, you're Black. Do you really want to talk about this other woman over here?" You know, so I feel like it's so true because it can be absolutely horrific to go through this day in and day out at your home, at your job, where you live, when you drive. That's all you see. So I think that horror, like he said, is a reality that a lot of people of color, especially women, especially darker skinned women, tend to go through. So I think that horror aspect from multiple perspectives was there because we have to live it. And I think that people don't always think that it's not that bad. Oh, you're fine, you can fit it. But honestly, sometimes it can be that bad. And it can be that tiring and that terrible for us if you don't have anyone to help you.
Everybody can't be lying. All of us can't be lying. It's real. Yes, ma'am.
So I guess I'm going to piggyback off both of what they said. What I took from the horror of it is it does follow us everywhere we go. And I think that's the horror of it. we wake up and we're, like for us, it's every day, every little thing, we have to watch what we say, watch what we do, watch what we wear, how we do our hair, depending on like what our environment is gonna be for that day. So I think because we every day have to wake up and think about these things, it becomes a lot, like exhaustion, to the point that not necessarily kills you for real, but you know, you're to the point where you're over it. Like it's too much sometimes.
Go ahead.
I just want to piggyback on what she said. I feel like as a Black woman, we can't give up. We have to keep going. And like her roommate was able to go home. She was like, I'm not going back there. And she didn't go back there. Her mom showed up to take her home.
Right.
Whereas when Jasmine said that, she was like, no, you have to go back. And I feel like that a lot of times, like we have to persist and keep going and be, one of my favorite words, resilient, no matter what, whether it's hurting us or not.
I almost feel like the witch was like a warning for that student, and like it was told through this perspective of what white people on that campus have said that it is bad, and they've like the pervasive whiteness that we've already addressed tonight in this movie is even taking urban legend so far that was someone's truth and turning that into a horror story, and that's how that manifests for that student is so complex. So I thought what you said was beautiful.
I think for me, when I think about the horror, I think of the psychological warfare the film like really captured in between like the realities of like her reality, the nightmares, the master as she's like triple thinking herself constantly. It just the film really does a lot of that, like how it's the psychological warfare every day. Something it captures that really well.
Sorry.
Go ahead. Sorry. I was gonna say I think something that to be off of something that you said earlier, kind of like how essentially it doesn't matter where you go, what corner of the earth you try to escape from. Essentially, with the way that imperialism works, right? Globalism, we see that essentially, especially specifically with wealth or with class, on all ends. Like you were saying, what's terrifying is, you know, you can't escape from it. You know, you do have to be resilient of sorts. You can fall into pitfalls, you know, loopholes of maybe kind of like we were talking about with where DEI fails us or where kind of the whole identity politics is. And I forgot who it was. It was a man specifically who spoke about how sometimes focusing too hard on representation, it essentially like makes us stop short. I forget who it is. It's literally, there's literally theory, and I saw a video recently of a young Black lesbian talk about it in relation to a lot of infighting, right, within lesbians and bisexuals. But so essentially kind of the horror of, you know, yeah, like whiteness or proximity to whiteness allows you to escape, or we see it now where you can't escape it because of surveillance. You live in a surveillance state, right? Ring cameras, things like that. You can so easily, you know, call for your dog. Imagine what it could be used for, whether you're lower working class, what have you, and you know, kind of seeing that on all ends, each character carry that with them. They're like, look, like it doesn't matter whether I go to an HBCU, like I'm going to find this. The microaggression is around the corner. I'm constantly being surveyed, watched. Every kind of interaction I have, I might say the wrong thing. And so I just tying it back to imperialism, I was like, yeah, like I hear that with many other friends or families who are Black and who live in the global South, and essentially understanding through text and literature and just like historical text, right? We hear from people who are the reason why we're all here, right? Our ancestors who essentially went through atrocities, egregious, horrible, right? Raping and pillaging, or even like current indigenous tribes who talk at like great lengths the things that they were able to do in order to fight back against imperialism, and a lot of it does look like collectivism and attacking the structures, right? But we're thinking where Jasmine, you know, without realizing, fell into the pitfalls of individualism, whereas Black women, Afro-descendants, right? You feel that you have to kind of go through it on your own, and you hear it especially with amongst a lot of Black women who are in the corporate world, right? And you'll hear about it amongst a lot of Black women who are lower class, whether here in the States or even out in different countries, right? Where structurally we don't have structure that can assist or help that single Black woman or that single Black father or the family that is in a third world country, so to say, right? And then even though we're not even touching on the topics of there's a level of privilege to have to kind of cross the border or to take that vote, right? Like, which again has its own drawbacks. But yeah, I just thought that when you tied it to that, I was like, yes, that's the whole thing I was thinking of the entire time, and kind of that like hit. I had like a feeling of like something in my throat almost, right? This heaviness, but then kind of like essentially hoping that although the movie ended, like maybe somewhere, you know, her leaving university was kind of her kind of like reclamation. Maybe she'd do something, right? Maybe she goes back to her community and does something. Who knows?
Thank you. I'm gonna open it back up to the audience, and including you, Chris Bliss. I'm gonna allow Ms. Barnes and Dr. Sadler to share. I know y'all had some thoughts. Please share.
Yeah, I'll keep it brief. One of the things I want to throw out, two things for people to kind of think about this question of haunting, right? And so again, this is where I say like the university is a cultural arm of imperialism, because even if she did feel like she was being haunted by something, there's no space that's gonna take that as a legitimate way of knowing. Exactly. Which is also a way to also say our ancestors who understood these things as haunting and spiritual also did not know what they were talking about, right? And so I think for us, or one of the things I want to push people to think about is perhaps it's not a question of whether the haunting was real or not, but what are the ways that we come to know violence in our body, in our spirit, in our minds that are constantly delegitimized, right? Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's actually great, because I was speaking to like the psychological thing that was mentioned earlier. It's just like the horror comes from, and even horror as a genre, like in film, it's like it creates like the sense of unease, but it also is meant to give you some type of answer at the end. And with that genre, and with this film specifically, it's like the psychological warfare of not being able to say, my intuition is my validation and I don't need anything else. You know, there's so many times where it's been like, okay, well, you didn't see what you saw, you didn't hear what you heard, you didn't experience how you experienced it, and it didn't feel how you know it was supposed to feel, or how you think it felt. So like the horror comes from the idea that you cannot rest in that intuition of knowing what you know. Basically exactly what you said.
Yeah, it's this weird, I think of the example of, so does anyone know who Joshua Doss is? I'm currently obsessed with Joshua Doss. He's like this political analyst on, his name is Doss Discourse, DOSS Discourse on Instagram. He's this brilliant young Black man. Jody knows who I'm talking about. Chris Bliss knows what I'm talking about. But anyway, I mentioned him because he speaks on CNN, very deep, melanated young man. And this woman, I can't remember her name, she's a anchor woman, she told him specifically, stop being obsessed with your melanin. And it was just really interesting because we can think of like these collective, like macro issues. We can, most of them, I would argue all, we can use personal, interpersonal, individual issues as symbols. So it sounds like someone who, like you've ever been in a relationship or had a friendship with a narcissist, and someone who used you, abused you, right? And then they would gaslight you, right? Somebody was like, ooh, well, okay, I've been there, done that, got the t-shirt, right? So we can speak, that's the same, on a macro level, it's the same thing. Someone telling you, stop being obsessed with your melanin, when I rarely leave the house without being reminded that I'm Black. And it's not because I don't want to be. It's not like I'm like searching like, you know, and maybe that's a part of it, right? But that's all in this pervasive system that sustains itself. When you talked about like surveillance, like Michel Foucault, we are surveilling ourselves. We're surveilling each other, right? We've become like, all of us, like cogs in this vicious system, right? And so then it has these layers of like, am I tripping, right? Like, how many times have you felt like, am I tripping? Did I? You know, and then you have to kind of do these mental and emotional gymnastics, warfare, to get it off of you, when who knows if you really are, right? So we got a few more minutes, because it's about to be 10 o'clock, so I don't want to keep y'all here. Yeah, Nia's like, wrap it up, B. So I want to also leave us just a couple minutes for us to connect with each other individually, okay? So I'm going to give the last audience floor to Ms. Chris Bliss, and then we can close it out, ladies. Chris, what you got for us?
Well, I feel like my share might be a little late because, you know, we moved on. But the only thing I was going to say was, I felt like, and I loved everyone's shares, of course, I felt like old girl, like the monster, the horror, the actual, you know, demon entity was kind of like the actual tangible example of the horror that we were all seeing, because you were talking about the things that we feel, we experience, but it's hard to put language to it. So although we were experiencing these horrific things that were happening, all of these you know, microaggressions, macroaggressions, and the like that was the physical manifestation and representation of all of the collective horror that was happening on that campus. So I felt like that kind of ran parallel, because it wasn't really about the witch. Like, I felt like that was just like I don't know, another theme, but that's kind of how I took old girl coming out the bed and just falling in the scratches. I just felt like that was like the physical manifestation of all the horror that we were seeing, but, you know, don't necessarily have specific language toward. And then lastly, you know, Black women, we want to talk about how that physically manifests. I remember you mentioning resilience. Like, that's the role that we have to play. We have to be resilient, but like, also let's talk about the chronic illness that we carry. Let's talk about the cyclical trauma that is passed down generation to generation, because we aren't stepping off of that role of like having to do all and having to be all. And so I think it's interesting, as someone who's an artist but also a yoga teacher, being in wellness, it's nice that we're talking more, Black women are talking more about our physical wellness, our emotional wellness, and how it's so intrinsically linked, and just an overarching message of like, girl, you gotta take care of yourself, because you said maybe it's not going to happen, it's not going to end in death, but a lot of times it does. Like, these structures are set up for us to literally die. Right. So, you know, us being alive and taking care of ourselves is one way to fight and combat that.
Thank you. Well, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing, and it was right on time. Ladies, we could really be here till about 3 o'clock in the morning, okay?
3:33.
Yeah, and this. Now, why do you do that? Come on now. Ladies.
No, you killed it.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm not. Ladies, can you please share any final thoughts that you have with us?
I just want to go back to what you were saying. I also agree with self-care, right? And I used to always say, oh, I have to be resilient in all of these spaces, right? I'm a Black woman, I gotta be resilient. But then if you think about it, we do get eroded over time. And it may not lead to death physically, but it can lead to the death of self in some way, right? You lose parts of yourself because of that. And so I am a believer of trying to not feel like we have to be resilient in every single space, and finding some collective support, you know, like that bonding in the bathroom could have went on longer, you know, gone to the AFRAM house, and putting some of the responsibility on the system. Like, it's not always our responsibility to solve every problem. We can bond with each other, but we can't always change a system, particularly not individually. So we have to put some of that back onto the system.
That's good. I think my final thought would just be, as a filmmaker, to any creatives in the room, we're all creatives first, any creatives and artists in the room, is just to continue, like you're kind of speaking about, though we cannot fix every problem, to continue to pour yourself into the part of the problem that you have ownership and that you feel like that you're called to, and being able to, be a beacon of light in that area, and continuing to just, like, as an artist, your job is to document the times, but that doesn't always have to mean that we have to do it at the cost of ourselves. So continue to do that in a way that is conducive to the art, conducive to whatever you're creative, but know that not everything is requiring for you to figure everything out, and for you to have a space where you have to endure to the end with everything, that you can rest in the creativity as well, and it can also make change.
I'll just say, as a professor, that the university is not the exclusive place in which knowledge production happens. Knowledge production happens in our communities. There are people who don't have degrees, who don't have credentials, who are very much intellectuals and experts. And I'm gonna, depart or deter a little bit from the other panelists and say, we do have a responsibility, I think, to build the institutions that we would like outside of these kind of mainstream institutions. And so if you're interested in any reading from Black women professors who are trying to get out of the university and organizing with students, I have a couple essays. I'm in teacher mode. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you. I want one, please. Thank you, ladies. It has been exactly what I thought it was going to be, feeding to my soul, and truly an honor to speak with y'all, and an honor that y'all been here for 3 hours. Thank you so much, y'all. Thank you. Have a good night.